be there with you. I wish I could be there with you in person, but I'm grateful that the gift of modern technology enables us to connect in this way. And I'm also grateful to meet one of my newest colleagues, Rabbi Levy, and to reconnect with Rabbi Ager, whom I have gotten to know over the years through her extraordinary service to the Reform movement as the president of the Central Conference of American Rabbis, and of course, the support she has given to the LGBTQ community. Your congregation, in welcoming her as your founding senior rabbi, has become part of the history of women in the rabbinate. I hope you take pride in that. I know that I do. And today I want to tell you a little bit about my journey to the rabbinate and share some reflections with you on my career as the 50th anniversary of my ordination approaches. There will be time at the end for your questions. I decided I wanted to be a rabbi when I was 16 years old, way back in 1962. Unfortunately, I do not remember why. I do remember always wanting to be a teacher, and whatever my favorite subject was is what I was going to teach. So one year I was going to be a math teacher, and then a teacher of English, and then a teacher of French. And in the end, I decided to be a teacher of Judaism, which is really what a rabbi is. Fortunately for me, my parents gave me what I consider to be one of the greatest gifts that a parent can give to a child. That is the courage to dare and to dream. As a result, I remain very focused on my goal, unconcerned that no woman had ever been ordained as a rabbi in America, and determined to succeed despite the doubts I heard experienced in the organized Jewish community. In those days, I did not think very much about being a pioneer, nor was it my intention to champion women's rights. I just wanted to be a rabbi. Although my parents were actively involved in Jewish organizational life, my family was not particularly observant. We did light Shabbat candles, celebrate Hanukkah with our extended family, and have a Passover Seder to which each of my siblings and I were encouraged to invite a non-Jewish friend to share the festivities and learn more about Jewish tradition. And I can still see my father at the head of our table, reclining on his pillow, leaving the table at the appropriate time to wash his hands, explaining the symbols on the Seder plate, and reading every single word of the Haggadah. My mother, of course, had been preparing for days, making gefilte fish from scratch, and fashioning those delicious matzah balls that were especially light and fluffy. One year, my father's business brought him into contact with a Catholic children's home run by a group of nuns. And as Passover was approaching, in the course of conversation, the Mother Superior began to ask questions about the customs and traditions of this holiday. Before long, my father had offered to conduct a Seder for 52 nuns and the Monsignor, volunteering my mother, of course, to oversee the meal and make enough chicken soup and matzah balls for all the participants. My father read the Haggadah, and the youngest nun recited the 4 questions. My mother, whom we lost just 5 years ago at the age of 101, remembered entering the dining room on the day of the Seder and being greeted by a large sign that said simply, Shalom. Moreover, the nuns presented her with a beautiful two-tiered silver tray that we continue to cherish. My father died in 1968. I will never forget the kindness of the nuns who, dressed in their traditional garb, came to our home while we were sitting Shiva to remember my father and give thanks for his life. And I am ever grateful to my parents for teaching us by example that all people are God's children, and we have much to learn from each other. As soon as I began to express more than a passing interest in our religious heritage, my parents made certain to include among my birthday and the Hanukkah presents more Jewish books, often inscribed by my father with a few words of encouragement, a wonderful way to expand my horizons and at the same time validate the seriousness of my intention. I grew up in the suburbs of Cleveland, and when I was in the 8th grade, my family moved from the east side of town to the west. As a result, my teenage years were spent in a predominantly non-Jewish neighborhood. In fact, my brothers and I were the only Jews in our high school. That made our participation in religious school and youth group all the more essential. We were active members of Beth Israel, the West Temple, a small congregation that taught me important lessons about what it means to be a temple family and how central to Jewish life is the task of tikkun olam, repairing the world. Although I did not become bat mitzvah, I was confirmed, and I continued my religious school studies through the 12th grade. As the time for college approached, my desire to be a teacher of Judaism remained firm. And I knew that for me, the best way to accomplish that goal was a career in the rabbinate. I applied to the undergraduate program jointly sponsored by the University of Cincinnati and the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. I was accepted, and in 1964, I began my studies. My years in rabbinic school were fraught with challenge. Some members of the college community thought I came to marry a rabbi rather than be one. In fact, I had been dating one of my fellow students for some time when a professor went up to him and said, "When are you going to marry her? Do the school a favor and get rid of her." My sincerity was often suspect. Consequently, I was under constant pressure to prove myself. Always I felt I had to be better and do better than my classmates so that my commitment and my academic ability would not be questioned. Occasionally, I sensed that some people would not be overly upset if I failed. More than once, it would have been easy to drop out, but I persevered because I truly wanted to be a teacher of Torah. Happily, I had the support of Dr. Nelson Glick, at that time president of the College Institute. He gave me his unqualified support and took care of a lot of little problems in the background that I probably never even heard about. Unfortunately, he died the year before I was ordained. His wife, Dr. Helen Glick, a physician in Cincinnati, told me, however, that prior to his death, he said there were three things he wanted to live to do, and one of them was to ordain me. His vision and his commitment laid the foundation for the ordination of women. And fortunately for me and for all of us, his successor, Dr. Alfred Gottschalk, shared that vision. And when he became president of the College Institute, he made the dream a reality by ordaining me on June 3rd, 1972, together with the 35 men who were my classmates. Only in recent years have I come to understand how bold and daring that action was on his part. Apparently, certain members of the faculty tried to convince him that I should not be ordained. This even though I had only 1 year left. 50 years ago, I did not really realize the amount of pressure he was under, nor did I understand the courage it took for him to step into someone else's shoes and fulfill a mission that someone else had begun. How grateful I am that he was willing to do that and to affirm the equality of women in the Reformed Jewish community. Now, finding a job was not all that easy. Some congregations wanted me for my publicity value. They wanted to be able to say they were the first to hire a female rabbi, and others would not talk to me at all. In the end, I was the last person in my class to get a job. But in my opinion, I got the best job of all, assistant rabbi at the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue in New York City. It always seemed particularly appropriate to me that I would come to a synagogue with a reputation for commitment to equality and social justice. Rabbi Edward E. Klein, the senior rabbi, took great pride in being introduced as the first equal opportunity employer in the American rabbinate. I stayed at the Free Synagogue for 7 years, and to be honest, the circumstances under which I left were not all that pleasant. I hoped I would be given a chance at some point to be the senior rabbi, but that was not to be. Neither that synagogue nor any other was ready nor willing to grant the title of senior rabbi to a woman. Indeed, for 2 years, I was unable to find a full-time position. I served as a chaplain at Lenox Hill Hospital in New York City and accepted a part-time position at Temple Beth El in Elizabeth, New Jersey, a synagogue of older members who were always very warm and welcoming. In 1981, I became rabbi of Monmouth Reformed Temple in Tinton Falls, New Jersey, a position I was privileged to hold for 25 years. The decision to retire 15 years ago was my own, believing as I do that rabbis and a lot of other people should know when to leave. It is always wise to say goodbye when they still like you. I did choose, however, to remain in my community. And as Rabbi Emerita, I worship at my temple every week, enjoying, as I do, the view from the pew. I have never regretted my decision to enter the rabbinate, and clearly my life has been enriched by the people I have been privileged to serve for nearly 5 decades now. I am grateful to God that part of my life's work has been to open new doors for women in the Jewish community. But at the same time, I have tried never to lose sight of the larger mission of the Jewish people, which is to derive from words of Torah a set of values and a sense of holiness that will enable us always to be partners with God in completing the world. What that means from my vantage point is not only participating in the task of Tikkun Olam, but creating a Jewish community based on equality and inclusivity, remembering that all of us are God's children, and as such, we should all have the opportunity to fulfill our creative potential to the fullest. My experience tells me that we are richer for the gifts that female rabbis and female leaders bring to our shared task. Rethinking previous models of leadership and opening doors to partnership and networking. Discovering new models of divinity, knowing that God embodies characteristics both masculine and feminine. Training new leaders to be more gender aware by welcoming to our institutions of higher learning respected female scholars able to share with us valuable lessons and insights unique to women. Creating new role models and allowing to be heard, often for the first time, the stories of those whose voices have been silenced for too long. The countless number of women who have enriched our people from biblical times on. Surely one of the most powerful lessons we have learned from the civil rights movement is that if you do not see someone who looks like you in a position of leadership, then you begin to feel left out. You have a sense that it cannot be done. We teach our daughters and our sons that everything is possible. There are no limits on what they can achieve when seeking to fulfill their creative potential and contribute to the vitality of the Jewish people. But sometimes when they interact with the institutions of Judaism, they discover a different message, a message that continues to exist in the larger society of which we are a part, a reluctance to believe that women are as competent and capable as men. For decades now, we have been trying to change that attitude in every field of endeavor: medicine, law, accounting, education, even politics. For the sake of our survival, we need to continue to change it in the Jewish community as well, to make certain that our daughters and granddaughters can be whatever they want to be, that they have not only equal opportunity, but equal pay, and that they are free from all forms of sexual harassment. Ordaining women as rabbis has also taught us something about the meaning of success. When I was first ordained, I thought the ultimate goal was to become rabbi of a large congregation. Indeed, I thought it was my obligation as the first woman rabbi. And in so many different ways, we are taught that bigger is better. But in reality, life is not measured by wealth or power, by material possessions or fame. Life is counted in terms of goodness and growth. Someone once said that our purpose in living is not to get ahead of other people, but to get ahead of ourselves. Always to play a better game of life. That is what success is all about. Have we done our best? Are we continuing to grow? Are we affected more deeply today by love and beauty and joy than we were yesterday? Are we more sensitive and compassionate to others? Have we learned to overcome our fears and accept our failures? Have we triumphed over selfishness and bitterness, cruelty and hatred? Do we count our blessings in such a way that we make our blessings count? That to me is success. In the words of Albert Schweitzer, the great secret of success is to go through life as a person who never gets used up. Grow into your ideals so that life can never rob you of them. People often think that I am the first woman rabbi, but in fact, I was the second. Regina Jonas was the first woman in the world to become a rabbi. She studied for the rabbinate in Berlin, but the professor who was her mentor died the year before she was to be ordained. And then the seminary refused to follow through with her ordination, although she had completed all of the requirements, including a thesis entitled, "Can Women Serve as Rabbis?" She was forced to wait until 1935 when she was ordained privately by Rabbi Max Dienemann, president of the Association of Liberal Rabbis in Berlin. At first, she was permitted to work only in schools, hospitals, and homes for the elderly. But as rabbis began to emigrate or be deported during the Holocaust, she was invited to preach and fulfill rabbinic duties at various synagogues, gaining a reputation for her pastoral work and preaching ability. A few years ago, I had the privilege of visiting Berlin and walking in the footsteps of Regina Jonas with a group of rabbis, historians, and lay people. And Rabbi Ager was with us on that trip. The trip itself was the idea of Dr. Gary Zola, executive director of the American Jewish Archives. He convinced the United States Commission for the Preservation of America's Heritage Abroad to place a plaque at Terezin in memory of Regina Jonas. And he invited the Jewish Women's Archive and its founding director, Dr. Gail Reamer, to co-sponsor the trip. It was an amazing experience that words cannot really convey. I was quite shaken by the number of similarities between my life and that of Regina Jonas. She did not see herself as a pioneer or a famous person, and neither did I. I just wanted to be a rabbi, and so did she. Both of us shared a similar definition of feminism. That is, all people should be given the opportunity to fulfill their God-given potential to the fullest. Her mentor died the year before she was ordained, and so did mine. In her case, the seminary refused to follow through, even though she had completed all the requirements. In my case, those who tried to stop my ordination were unsuccessful. I was always held to a higher standard, as was she, and often male leaders and rabbis would tell us to be patient. She did not think a female rabbi, should marry and have children. It would be too difficult. And ultimately, I came to the same decision, believing I myself would never be able to do both and do them well. She loved to preach and teach. In Terezin, we found papers on which she had handwritten titles for some of her lectures, Women in Judaism, Women in the Bible, etc., all topics that I and all women rabbis have been asked to speak about. Before being deported to Terezin, Rabbi Jonas gave her documents to the Berlin Jewish community for safekeeping. Had she not done so, we would know even less than we do now about her life and the significant contributions she made to the Jewish community, which continued to bear fruit even today. Not realizing that I was in effect following in her footsteps, I announced several years ago that I would be donating my documents and papers to the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati. And I invited all female rabbis of whatever denomination to do the same, so that those doing research on the history of women in the rabbinate could come to one place and find what they needed. When we were in Berlin, we had an opportunity to see her papers, which had remained hidden until after the fall of the Berlin Wall. That's probably why so few people have ever heard of her. We were overwhelmed with emotion when the archivist brought out this tiny box of papers, all we have left of Rabbi Regina Jonas, except for those few handwritten notes we saw at Terezin, listing titles of lectures she gave while ministering to her people. It was at Terezin that we dedicated a plaque in her memory, ensuring that she would never again be forgotten. Participating in the ceremony were, among others, Helga Hoskova, at that time an artist who at that time was one of the 100 remaining survivors of Terezin, and her son and granddaughter, who provided music on the violin and organ for the ceremony. I will never again hear Kol Nidre without remembering their rendition. Helga's story reminds us that God enables ordinary people to do extraordinary things, and that Holocaust survivors triumphed over Hitler by returning to life rather than retreating from it, by having children and grandchildren, and showing that despite the horrors of the Holocaust, there is meaning and purpose in human life. Of the four firsts, by that I mean Rabbi Sandy Sasso, the first woman ordained by the Reconstructionist movement, Rabbi Amy Eilberg, the first woman ordained by the conservative movement, and Rabbi Sarah Hurwitz, the first woman ordained by modern Orthodoxy, and myself participate in this ceremony at Terezin. Each of us read a passage written by Regina Jonas herself. And this is part of what I chose to read. I hope a time will come for all of us in which there will be no more questions on the subject of woman. For as long as there are questions, something is wrong. But if I must say what drove me as a woman to become a rabbi, two elements come to mind: my belief in the godly calling and my love for the people. God has placed abilities and callings in our hearts without regard to gender. Thus, each of us has the duty, whether man or woman, to realize those gifts God has given. If you look at the things this way, one takes woman and man for what they are, human beings. I think it's amazing that those words were written back in the 1930s. And there was something quite remarkable that day. about giving life to her words and affirming our connection to her. Then we recited El Malei Rachamim, perhaps the first time that this memorial prayer had ever been recited for Regina Jonas. As I think about Rabbi Jonas, one of the things I admire most about her is that she chose the well-being of her people over her own self-interest. She could have escaped the horrors of the Holocaust, but chose instead to accompany her people to the concentration camps, to continue to minister to their needs and help them find meaning and purpose in the values of Jewish tradition. We cannot help but stand in awe of her courage. We return from our journey prepared to tell her story, to ensure that she is given her rightful place in the chain of Jewish tradition that binds the generations together, past, present, and future, and determined to make certain that her yahrzeit would be observed from year to year in synagogues of all denominations. The actual date of her death is unknown, but with the help of the Holocaust Museum in Washington and Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, we determined that she was taken from Terezin together with her mother on October 12, 1944. Her name appears on the transport list. And she arrived in Auschwitz on October 14, 1944, where it was assumed that she was murdered that very day. And that's because we never heard anything else about her. That day happened to be Shabbat Bereshit. Therefore, we have chosen Shabbat Bereshit, the very first Shabbat of the Jewish year, as the date of her yahrzeit. And we hope that next fall, you will join us in saying Kaddish for her. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share her story. I like to think that whenever we do, we bring honor to her memory. I conclude now with some words of wisdom that came about a few years ago when I was asked to contribute to a book edited by Molly Mayer called "If I Only Had 5 Things to Pass On from My Life, They Would Be." By the way, as the holy days approach during this month of Elul, Slichot will be here soon. This is really a great activity to think about what are those 5 things you want to pass on to those who come after you. Here are my 5. First, know yourself and be yourself. When I was in rabbinical school, I always assumed I would marry and have children. In fact, I often said in interviews that in my synagogue, there would be a nursery next to my study. After I was ordained, however, and began serving God and the Jewish people, I discovered that I would never be able to have a career and a family and do both well. I stand in awe of those who can, but I know that I am not one of them. I chose to devote all my time and energy to my career, and I have never been sorry because I know that the people whose lives I touch are now part of my extended family. Second, don't worry. There are moments in every life when worry overwhelms us and inhibits our ability to function. For those times, I have developed my worry rule. Sit down every morning for 10 minutes and worry as much as you want. Then get up and welcome the opportunities for growth and for good that each new day brings and make the most of them. There will be another 10 minutes tomorrow to worry again. Always try your best. Many people hesitate to try new things because they are afraid of failure. I believe the only true failure is in never daring to fail. Success feels good, but there is nothing wrong with failure as long as we try our best and learn from our mistakes. The world moves forward every day because someone is willing to take the risk. Live with humility. Our sages taught people should have two pockets so they can reach into one or the other according to their needs. In one pocket, there should be a slip of paper with the words, "For my sake was the world created." And in the other, the words, "I am but dust and ashes." In our day and age, humility seems to be a forgotten virtue. Being humble does not mean that we should deny or negate our achievements. On the contrary, taking pride in what we have accomplished brings great joy. But pausing to remember that we do not stand alone is even more enriching. Saying thank you on a regular basis to God, who gives us the power to create, and to others who have helped us along the way, keeps us from becoming arrogant. And finally, maintain your sense of humor. One way to deal with life's difficulties is by discovering and embracing the healing power of laughter. Many a tense moment has been relieved by bringing a bit of humor to the situation. And an old Yiddish proverb advises, weep before God, laugh before people. Learning to laugh soothes the spirit, and learning to laugh at yourself keeps you from taking yourself too seriously. Laughter is contagious, and it makes the world a more pleasant place. As I come now to the end of my remarks and prepare to take your questions, let me share with you my favorite poem, The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost, which pretty much sums up the way I feel about my life. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Thank you so much, and I'm ready now for questions.
Oh, wonderful, Sally. Thank you so much, Rabbi. That was just amazing. You brought back such fun memories of our trip together to discover the life of Rabbiner Regina Jonas, Rabbi Regina Jonas. It was really quite amazing to share that experience with you. And I too, I had the same. I'll just share this with you. I had the same reflection about hearing. When I hear Kol Nidre now, I'm always transported to that moment in Terezin, where the four firsts, as we like to call you, four first women rabbis of each of the four major denominations participated in that ceremony. So thank you.
And I did want to mention that on the Jewish Women's Archive website, there is a 10-minute video of that dedication ceremony. Oh, so anybody who wants to go, jwa.org, and it was put together, and it won an award of some kind, an honorable mention, I think.
Well, I'm putting it in the chat, if the link, so people can go and watch that for themselves. There's a couple cool, great questions in the chat that I do want to go explore first. Eric Green asked a really great question. Were you the first woman to be admitted, or was there other people, do we know, before you that had applied and had been turned down to HUC?
There were other women who had been admitted, and most all of them dropped out, married rabbis and dropped out. As a matter of fact, a woman named Ann Blitzstein was there when I arrived. She was in the undergraduate program, and frankly, I thought she was going to be the first woman rabbi. And it turned out that she married Howard Phobe, and dropped out of the program. But unfortunately, he died too soon, and she went back and became a rabbi. And I was present the day that she was ordained. So that was very special. Also, Pamela Nadell wrote a wonderful book called Women Who Would Be Rabbis. And these are women from, if I know she starts somewhere in the 1800s and goes through, and there were many women. As a matter of fact, one of them, the first one I can remember, is Ray Frank, who was allowed, they called her the girl rabbi, and she was allowed to preach a sermon on the holy days, I believe it was. And there were many others along the way. Now, in 1922, the Central Conference of American Rabbis passed a resolution saying that women could be rabbis. And the daughter of one of the professors, David Neumark, her name was Martha. She came into the college and did almost like 7.5 years of the training. But then for whatever reason, she did not finish. She was not ordained. And when I was ordained, she wrote me a very gracious letter. That letter is now at the American Jewish Archives. I just delivered it this week. For the 50th anniversary, the American Jewish Archives will be having an exhibit of many of the historical memorabilia of my life. That will include letters that people wrote to me and many, many, many newspaper articles. I will tell you that I'm a very private person, and that paradox of my personality is that I chose to have a career that made me a public figure. And when I was in rabbinic school still, and especially in the early years, I had press conferences all the time. I remember I was flying to someplace, I forget where, to give a lecture. And as we landed, there were many famous people on the plane that day. There was a senator, an entertainer. I can't even remember everybody. When we were about to land, the announcement came over, would Rabbi Sally please stay on the plane? And all these people got off the plane. And, you know, in those days, we didn't enter right into the airport. We had to go down the steps. And when it was my turn to come down the steps, the cameras, the lights, everything went on. And then they ushered me into a room for a press conference. And for me, the greatest challenge was always to pretend like I had never heard the question before. To say, oh, what an excellent question, and then answer it. If you'd like to see an interview, you can Google me and hit on videos or images. And there is a video of ABC News in 1973 Frank Reynolds interviewing me and just sort of catching up after my first year in the rabbinate. And I was just so positive about everything. Finally said, come on, Rabbi, there must be something that went wrong. So you would get a big kick out of that.
That's fantastic. One of the other questions in here from Joanne Moss is like, what were some of the reasons that were that attempted to stop your ordination in the 70s? What were some of the things that they said to you or that you found out subsequently?
You know, they really did not say anything to me. There really was no reason. Just think back to what the atmosphere was like. You know, that was the beginning of the feminist movement. And a lot of people, I got criticized for not being the right kind of feminist, I guess, because I thought there were two kinds. The people like Gloria Steinem and those people who were out protesting, speaking, bringing attention, and then people like me who were just doing it, who could be an example of something that was possible. And so not everybody thought that I was the right kind of feminist, but of course I have always believed that every person has the right to fulfill their God-given potential. So nobody ever really said very much to me about it. I think at first it was difficult. There were 35 men in my class and me. It was difficult for professors who were very used to having only men in the class and who would, you know, just say, start their class, gentlemen, oh, and lady. And they just, you know, they had to get used to having me. There was one class, I swear, in the Talmud class, the professor called on me every time. I didn't think that my classmates had to ever prepare because they knew that I was going to be called on. On the whole, my classmates were very supportive. During the last year of school, Dr. Glick, I guess it was really the second last year, Dr. Glick arranged for me to travel around the country and speak. And that was his way of letting the reform movement know a woman rabbi is coming. And I remember some of those places, 1,000 people would show up. Wow. They just wanted to see me and see that I was human. And I went as often as I could so that, and whenever I went to one of those events, my classmates would tape the recorder. I mean, would tape the class so that I wouldn't miss anything. And I remember sometimes you could hear the professor say, turn off the recorder for a few minutes so they could have their little chat without me sitting there. You know, so again, they did not always think that I was going to finish.
Wow. Amazing. But you fooled them all. That's the reality.
I did fool them all. And again, one of the things we have to remember is that Reform congregations were not prepared for me. Mm-hmm. The conservative movement did this a different way. They studied it for like 15 years, and not quite 15, but when Amy Eilberg was ordained, the conservative movement was ready for women rabbis. In my case, they were not. And when I left the Free Synagogue, as I said, I could not find another job, a full-time position, because congregations were not ready. And I will tell you a story. I was interviewing with the congregation on the phone. I thought the interview went pretty well, and they forgot to hang up. So I listened.
Oh my goodness.
I'm human like everybody else. And I listened, and they said, oh, she sounds great. She's intelligent, creative, this, that, the other thing. But, we could never have a woman rabbi. And my experience, because I was the first, I faced everything before everybody else did. And that experience was the basis for the placement commission to create a contract or a pledge that congregations have to sign that they will not discriminate on the basis of gender, sexual orientation, or age. And so they have to sign that.
Right, and congregations, when they're searching for a rabbi, have to pledge,
That's right.
and they have to go through bias training as well now for their search committees, particularly around gender and sexual orientation, race, and now gender identity and gender expression. Well, Sally, this has just been an amazing journey through your rabbinate, through your historic rabbinate. You've blazed a trail for all of us. We are grateful for your time, for your dedication through the years, your fortitude, your inner strength, your spirituality, your intellect, your grace, with which you have carried this big burden in some ways, and yet this big gift. And you have changed a lot of our lives, mine included. I'm grateful to call you my teacher and my friend, and I know that everybody's really, really thrilled to share. And this kickoff of your Jubilee year, the 50th anniversary of your ordination coming up this spring. And if you get a chance to come to Cincinnati in May, Sally's display of all of her archival material and her achievements will be on display at the American Jewish Archives, which is on the campus of Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, the Reform Movement Seminary. And there'll be more activities during the year. So I know some of the LA congregations are planning, Sally, to honor your journey, and there'll be more coming out in the spring. For those of you that are with Kol Ami, we invite you to join us for our high holidays. Rosh Hashanah will be online. Yom Kippur will be hybrid. We invite you to join with us. Information on our website. And starting in October, a 3-week morning class, 11 a.m. Pacific time, with Dr. Paul Lipitz, who's been on faculty at Tel Aviv University for 40 years, who's an expert in the Middle East and Israel, and we'll be talking about all the different pieces of the pie there. So we invite you to join us for that as well. Sally, thank you again. Thank you, Rabbi Preisand.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for being with us. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and an early Happy New Year to everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye now.